I'm so excited that we're all here and very excited that I get to have an hour to share some knowledge and insight about two areas I'm very passionate about, athletic endeavors and yoga. And so Lizzie, thank you for that great introduction. And kind of the key things is I'm faculty at NC State University, so I talk about exercise principles and exercise science, nutrition, wellness, health, all of that every single day. And with YogaFit, senior master trainer, so teaching a lot of yoga trainings, and one track I teach a lot in is our Yoga for Athletes track, which is geared specifically to teaching to athletes of various disciplines. And as we are starting to talk about this, I want to take a side step to mention again with athletes, really what does that mean? And we talk everything, anyone who uses their body for their sport or activity. So we can consider this high level performing athletes, or just that weekend warrior that's competing in local races, or even a person who is athletic and they have their sport or activity, but they're not actually competing. So it's really just thinking of athletes as a special population, the same way we would think about kids or seniors or prenatal, and it's just focusing towards that population with the special considerations. And another reason why I'm very excited about this is I myself am a competitive athlete for Team USA. I compete in duathlon, which for those that are unfamiliar is multi-sport event that is run, bike, run. So like a triathlon, but without the swimming, you just get extra time running. And that's something I've been doing for a handful of years now, except for 2020. No races happened in 2020, but hopefully we will get going back that direction. And yeah, so that's kind of my spiel. And what I have for us today is I have a PowerPoint that I will provide to Lizzie to be able to get to you all, anyone who's interested in having that. And so it'll give us some visuals. We will do a little talk intermixed with a little activity, practical application. So you're welcome to watch and participate along. And again, all that stuff is in the PowerPoint, so you guys can refer back to it later if you'd like. And so we are just going to get right into it. And I'm going to share over my screen to you all. And getting right into kind of why athletes, how is yoga beneficial for athletes? And one thing I first like to say is we need to go back to, this comes down to, if I want to approach a sports team or an athlete and say what yoga can do, how it can benefit for them, this is where we want to start, is talking about the 5 components of fitness. And these are attributes that a person needs to have or achieve to perform at their peak physical ability. And each aspect is important to health. And they are listed there. We have muscular strength, muscular endurance. We have cardiorespiratory fitness, also called cardiorespiratory endurance, flexibility, and body composition. And you can see that they're all in this pie chart the same size, and they're all equally important. And really you got to think of it as you are only as strong as your weakest link. So if we are not focusing on one of these, it's going to be a detriment to all the others. It's going to be that limiting factor. And we can think with any sport or activity, it's going to focus more or less to those. And I mentioned to you all that I compete at duathlon, run, bike, run. So you could probably guess what I spend a lot of time doing. And if I were to draw my pie chart, it would look pretty much like this. Spend a lot of time doing the cardio. It's like, that's my main thing. It's like, is today a run day? Is today a bike day? Or am I doing both today? And then I actually have to work actively to ensure I'm getting balance to the others. And even with the active, like mental focus that I have, you can see that my muscular endurance and muscular strength, like I do some Les Mills body pump classes, which is why I gave the muscular endurance a little bit higher. And then even though I teach yoga like several times during the week and have my own personal practice, it's still, in terms of the whole balance of what I'm doing, it's just a smaller component. And all 4 of those actually contribute to body composition. Oftentimes people ask, what is body composition? And that's that balance of fat mass to non-fat mass, the body fat percentage. And so it's a combination of being able to do strength, being able to do cardio, but also a consideration of nutrition. So if I were to look at this and say, all right, well, where can I focus a little bit more? I can focus on all these other things on this side to help balance out. So my yoga practice would look much different than someone else's. So say they were a CrossFit strength athlete, maybe a football player, any different sport that doesn't focus as much on the running and biking like I do, their whole pie chart would look different. Therefore, their yoga practice would look different. And one thing I like to also put in here is the nice fact of that training effects are evident after 6 weeks of training, and deconditioning starts to occur within 2 weeks of inactivity. So again, if someone is not focusing on one of these aspects of the pie chart, then it would be a detriment to them overall. So if I'm not doing my muscular strength, if I'm not doing my flexibility, it would then start to limit my ability to do cardio. And I've felt that plenty of times. So if we step back here, again, we can think of all those aspects and how I can approach the yoga practice with a specific athlete, whether that's an individual or a team, and I can design their yoga workout routine to reflect what they need. So if they need more flexibility and maybe more of a gentle practice, working on lengthening strength or lengthening the muscles. If it's someone like me that maybe my lower body is strong and need to balance out the upper body, so it can be a more working on more vinyasa flows and some planks and all that would strengthen the upper body. And ultimately, we can think that yoga is always going to be inverse relationship to the training intensity. And one of the things we talk about in our Yoga for Athletes training is being able to design a practice that meets where an athlete is in their season. So for me, duathlon generally in this area of the United States starts in February. Actually, in next weekend is the very first race in North Carolina. So, starting early, and then we will be done by about June, July, because then it gets to be 100 degrees and humidity like 90%. And whereas other areas of the US, they may be shifted slightly different. And then after duathlon, I then go into my cyclocross season. And so what I can think is that my yoga early in the year, like right now, is preparing me for my peak season. So it can be a little bit more intense in nature. And then when I get to the peak season, it's going to change and vary. So that's one thing we can do too, is cycle through the different intensities and the focus that we have with our athletes. But ultimately, one key thing that yoga can do to benefit athletes is working on flexibility and mobility. That is key, 100% key. And oftentimes people think of yoga as just stretching, and I love it. The first time someone does a yoga practice, I'm like, wow, that was hard. And it's just not passive. And I like us to understand the difference between flexibility and mobility. Flexibility is the range of motion of a joint. It's passive. It's like if you were to do a standing forward fold, body weight and gravity is taking you into that position. You don't really have to do anything. Whereas mobility, the difference there is that you need strength to bring yourself into that position. So it's how well can you move your joints? How can you move through that range of motion yourself? And the key part about that mobility is that it protects against injury. This is what sets yoga aside that's different from just, hey, let's just do some stretching, is that's all passive. Whereas in yoga, what we are doing is that active movement through range of motion. We are using strength to move our body through all different planes of motion, which is another key thing that yoga does that's different than just stretching, is that any athlete, any athletic discipline is going to have, we have 3 planes of motion, if we recall. Now we're dominant in one plane of motion. And so we have sagittal, which is like a front back motion, flexion, extension. We have transverses, which is rotation. And we have our frontal plane, which is abduction, adduction. Oh, I just hit my hand. And so with that, what we tend to do is just always be in that sagittal plane of motion. And so when we do that, we lose the ability to use our muscles in the other plane of motion, which is going to also not help us with injury protection. So we need to be able to be strong and mobile in all different planes of motion, which again, that's something we do in yoga. And there is one sequence I want to introduce us to that we'll get to practice right now together that brings us, it's very easy, brings us through all those planes of motion. Another thing that I always recommend is, instead of thinking for athletes as yoga practice, like, oh, I have to fit in an hour of yoga this week. Nope, just think of it as yoga snacks. So since we are focusing a little bit more to what they need right here, right now, is yoga snack. Do you have 10, 15 minutes to be able to do a short little sequence that's geared towards you? Probably. And it's that frequency of being able to do that. So instead of going to an athlete and saying, all right, I need you to do 2 one-hour yoga sessions this week. And they're like, how? I can't fit that in. I've got all my other stuff to do. We would say, like, all right, I have this 15-minute sequence for you. I want you to do it 4 days a week or 5 days a week. They're like, oh, okay, I can fit that in. So this is one of those really great sequences. So I'll show it to you first, and then we can go ahead and practice together for those that want to practice along and get some mobility into your Wednesday. And it's a sequence that starts with downward facing dog. From there, we get to step forward into a lunge, and we make it into a twisting lunge. And that's going to bring us into that rotation. We don't nearly get enough rotation in life. We're then going to open up the other direction to do a side angle pose. And so that's going to take us from rotating one way to rotating the other. It's going to be really great for our spine and our hips. We'll then be able to step forward into a pyramid pose, lengthening the back of the legs and the spine, into 3-legged dog, and that allows us to come back to down dog and do the other side. So it's a very simple sequence, and it's very effective. Everyone's like, it feels so great in my body. So I'm moving in all these different directions I don't move in nearly enough every day. So with that, for those that would like to join, I've got my yoga mat back there, and you can grab some space around you. You don't need too much space, and we will flow through this a couple of times just to see how to do this sequence, what it feels like, and then we can talk a little bit more on other good stuff for athletes. With that, we can find ourselves in a mountain pose, and that's with our feet underneath our hips. And as we ground here, let's inhale and rise our arms up to the sky and release down into forward fold. This is going to allow us to come back into our downward facing dog, where we step our feet back and hips up to the sky. This is our first little bit of movement for the day. It's really nice to pedal the heels down to the mat, alternating pedal push. And then as we start our multi-directional flow sequence, we'll take our right foot and step to the top of the mat. From this position, inhaling and rising arms up into a high lunge. This allows us to elongate our posture. And as we place our hands down, we'll ground our left palm, reaching our right arm up to the sky, gazing upwards towards that lifted palm, hugging that front knee in towards the belly. And as we release that lifted palm, we're going to place it down on the inside, pivoting on that back foot to create a warrior 2 position, lifting up elbow to our thigh as our back arm rises to sky. This is our side angle pose. As we release here, placing hands back down to the mat, shifting to lunge, and we're going to step into a shortened stance for pyramid. We can place our hands either on thigh, shin, foot, or floor, wherever allows us to be comfortable with long legs and a long neutral spine. As we now bend that front knee, stepping back to lunge, lifting the front leg into air for 2-legged dog. And we'll return to downward facing dog. You can either stay here, or if you want to take one of our vinyasa flow where we go to plank, chaturanga, upward facing dog, that just is a little additional upper body movement and flow. Now for our other side, we'll step our left foot forward, inhaling to rise arms up to the sky. And as we reach through our fingertips, releasing hands down, grounding our right palm down to the mat, inhaling left arm to sky. This is our twisting lunge. Again, hugging that front knee in towards the chest. And as we release that lifted palm, pivoting open, warrior 2 stance, lifting into our side angle. And as we release from here, pivoting back into lunge, shortening stance into our pyramid pose. Inhaling to lift, and then once we align ourselves, we can then hinge down further. Again, same place, hands on thigh, shin, or all the way to the floor. And as we bend that front knee, stepping back into lunge, and we'll take the front foot into air, 3-legged dog. And returning to downward facing dog. Again, staying here or flowing through a vinyasa. And we'll do it just one more time on each side. Our right foot steps forward. Inhaling to rise. And when we do this sequence, you can either hold for a breath or 2 if you're introducing the movement, or you can make it more of a flow. Grounding the left palm, right arm to sky, inhaling breath. We can gaze upward or downwards towards the mat. And as we release, opening into our side angle. If we have the flexibility, we can definitely make this an extended side angle. Releasing our hands, pivoting to lunge, stepping into pyramid pose. Inhaling to elongate both the legs and the torso, pulling back gently with the right hip. Softening that front knee, stepping to lunge. Front foot into air, three-legged dog. And downward facing dog. Again, holding or flowing. And then as we're back into downward facing dog, one more time on the other side, left foot steps forward. We'll inhale to rise arms to the sky. Making sure to engage that back leg and the core, shoulders down the back. Releasing our hands, grounding the right palm. Left arm to sky for twisting lunge. And as we release the hand, we'll pivot open into our side angle. Releasing back, stepping forward into our pyramid pose. And by now, if we're flowing along with me, you should notice how we're going all different directions. So it also challenges all your stabilizing muscles. And as we step back to lunge, three-legged dog, and downward facing dog. So that was the multi-directional flow sequence. Hopefully you all that participated along felt that different movement and how we're able to move the body. And I'll pause here in case there was any questions that came up in the chat.
No questions that came up. Everyone is just telling us how excited they are to be here and good morning. And we had a few questions about the PowerPoint, which you will be sharing. So that will be shared with you all after the webinar. So you can continue.
So for those that may have logged in and missed it, there'll be a little talk, a little demonstration, a little talk, a little demonstration. So we'll keep going on where we were, which is now taking a step. Not only does yoga help from mobility, which should be your new word that you get to tuck in. We just don't talk about flexibility, we talk about mobility, injury prevention, which is key. Athletes, actually everybody, and that sequence is something that you can include with your everyday classes too. It doesn't have to be just athletes, which is what I love about some of the things we're going through today, is that it's applicable to ourselves, applicable to everyone that we can do yoga with. And
one question that just came in about that's the specific flow, actually from Carrie Scott. How many times do you recommend your athletes to do that flow prior to play or run or whatever physical activity they're getting into?
That is a fantastic question. I would say it's a little bit of individualistic to that athlete. If it's someone like me, that my hips and low back are so incredibly tight, I would need to do that at least 2 more times, like 1 more time on each side, so 6 times total, just to be like, all right, things are warmed up. And generally, the younger an athlete is, the more, mobility and generally still have because of age. And the older we get, the more stiff if we're not maintaining our mobility. So I'd say it's really just going to depend on a person. They'll start to feel that point. And hopefully you all felt it too. When we did the first 1 or 2, you're like, okay. And then as we got 3 or 4, you're like, oh, now I'm starting to feel things are warmed up. And depends time of day. Like first thing in the morning when we wake up, we're a little bit more stiff because we haven't been moving. Versus if an athlete, this was at the end of the day and they've gone throughout their whole day doing whatever it is that they're doing, and if they're doing an evening workout, practice, game, whatever it is, it will vary a little bit. But so I guess those people, I'm like, that didn't really answer the question with a number.
I think that answered the question perfectly.
I would say like 4 to 6 times. Really good.
It's very, like you said, individualistic and independent on the sport, activity, how old they are. But 4 to 6, I would say, is probably good. Thank you.
And now we're going to talk another thing that is beneficial to our athletes. And again, one of the questions I think was initially early on was like, well, how can I go to someone and I want to work with an athlete or sports team or what have you? How do I kind of like market this to them? And it's always knowing about the benefits, talking the benefits and what you can do. So one of them we just learned, building mobility for injury prevention. And then another key aspect of injury prevention, and we're looking right now at the cumulative injury cycle, is muscle imbalances. How many athletes have you met that do not have a single muscle imbalance? Doesn't it? Zero. That is the whole thing, is that with athletes there is repetitive motion. Even if an athlete is really good about working on muscle imbalances, they're still going to exist. And muscle imbalances are key over here on the cumulative injury cycle, because what's going to happen as they go around, and I always say that the left side over here is that's normal. If you exercise, that's normal. Tissue trauma is like micro tears in the muscle from exercise. Inflammation, your body's natural healing mechanism. Muscle spasm is that tightness you feel, DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. That's going to happen if you exercise. It's when you get over to this side over here. Adhesions, knots in the muscles. Have we felt that? I'm sure everyone has. And then altered neuromuscular control is your brain telling your body to move, and it will find a way to do it, and it will find compensations. And you probably have even, anyone who's worked with athletes, or maybe they're an athlete themselves, can say like, they can feel compensations. Like, I feel like I'm using this muscle to do that, or I feel like my form and technique is not right. And then that just reinforces muscle imbalances, which is what's going to ultimately lead to injury. And with all athletes, there are common muscle imbalances. And another thing that we talk about in our trainings is being able to look sport specific. So whether you're working with a soccer player, a tennis player, football, any gymnast, anybody, we can look more specifically to what they have as a muscle imbalance, but there's common muscle imbalances that exist in athletes and in people. And the fancy words to say is upper cross syndrome, which is forward rounded posture. That's everyday life causes that too. You know, sitting at the computer, driving a car, stress. And then we have lower cross syndrome, which is anterior pelvic tilt. That happens in sports and activities that use the lower body. That happens in all of us that spend time seated in a flexed hip position. So what we can do is do short sequences to help with this. And help with this, what I mean is work on correcting it. And so, as I mentioned before, I'm really big about yoga snacks with athletes and with people together. Is like, what can I give you that's going to be the best? And with our everyday classes, like the class that I teach tonight, it's just going to be a general flow. It's going to be variety to kind of meet everybody in the room. But with athletes or other individuals that we're working with, we can say like, all right, I'm not just going to choose a pose. I'm going to choose the best pose. What's the best pose to help you with your tightness in your trapezius up here? What's something that's going to help you with weakness in the low back, so I can strengthen your back and help you create more neutral posture easily? How can I stretch through your pectorals most adequate way? And then is there a pose, two poses that does all of that? So it's kind of like the king of poses. And then same thing with the lower body. Tight hip flexors. How many people talk about tight hip flexors? And I know there was one question about this, so I'm going to take a little side into my, I love anatomy, by the way, if you can't tell, is that someone asked a question, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was about how can I choose poses that also balance out the legs, not just focusing on lengthening the hamstrings, which yes, there's a lot of yoga poses that lengthen hamstrings, but also work on the quads. And I was like, yes, because there's not a lot of poses that work on the quads in terms of like quad stretch. Dancer, bow, that's about it. But we have to think a little bit of anatomy, and that's what I love about our trainings, is that we do it from the anatomical standpoint and that we understand. And I can work with an athlete that I have no idea what that sport is. Like, I could just watch their bodies and see how they move and see what kind of movement patterns they have. And then I know exactly how to work with them. I don't have to do that sport myself. I don't even have to have the capabilities or desire to, and I can still work with that athlete. And so with this lower cross syndrome, anterior pelvic tilt, tight hip flexors, and we have our psoas, that's the hip flexor, but also your quad, rectus femoris. And so that tight quad, tight hip flexors, those go hand in hand. And when we get the anterior pelvic tilt, the forward tilt of our pelvis, what happens is weak abs. How many people are always trying to work on strengthening their abs? Weak glutes, essential. And then also what happens when that the anterior pelvic tilt is the hamstrings become elongated. So in many athletes, they think they have tight hamstrings. No, their hamstrings are just fine. They're pulled long. They feel tight they seem tight because of the pelvis in that anterior position is pulling it long. And if they were to strengthen the glutes, strengthen the abs, stretch the hip flexors, all of a sudden their pelvis goes back to normal. And then it's like, oh, hey, my hamstrings are actually just fine. This is great. So again, another reason why we can work on, again, those best yoga postures. Yeah, you don't want to avoid stretching your hamstrings. You don't ever want to exclude a muscle from strength or stretch. You need to do both. For every muscle, strengthen it and stretch it. And then if it needs a little bit more strengthening, yeah, add a little bit more for that. If it needs a little bit more stretching, yeah, add a little bit more for that. So we can still include those hamstring stretches, but it's like, how can I focus on glutes, abs, and then in the upper back? So I have for us as another little, and we could talk about that more, but we have more things to do. And that is, I created a little sequence for muscle imbalances, particularly those muscle imbalances, which common in athletes, common in everyone who spends time seated or living because of stress and because of how we sit. And so I have the sequence written out here for you, so you can take it with you and you're like, what did we do? It was so great. And I'm gonna lead us through it. And so another little opportunity for us to find some movement in our bodies. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop share here. And we can all, if we're going to, again, be on our yoga mats. And this is, again, really wonderful because it's about like a 5-minute sequence, and I'm going to, don't have it memorized, so I'm going to make my screen a little bit larger so at least I can see it over here. And so it's something that takes about 5 minutes to do. It's great if you want to do it in the morning, in the evening. I like to personally do it in the evening at the end of the day to kind of take care of the body. I generally exercise first thing in the morning. So that multi-directional flow sequence is something I do in the morning. This is something that I think is really great at the end of the day. And we're going to start in that mountain pose again, feet are at our hips. And our first pose is a chest expansion. So we're going to take a couple shoulder rolls, lift our shoulders up, back, down, relax and release. And as we take our hands back, we want to interlace our fingertips together, lifting through our heart center. And what's key about this is that we're able to activate our mid-upper back. So we're using the strength of the back to open up through the front. And we want to think about drawing the shoulder blades together. Oftentimes people think about squeezing the palms together. And so try to make our hands a little bit lighter so we can focus on strengthening that upper back. Take a couple of deep breaths. And we like to hold these postures about 3 to 5 breaths, which would be about 30 to 45 seconds. Take a couple more deep breaths. I might go a little bit like more to the 3 breath with you all this morning, just because we have plenty other stuff to talk about. And then from the top of our mats, as we release, let's inhale and rise our arms up to the sky. And as we release down into our forward fold, let's step our left foot back, and we're gonna go into a low lunge, dropping that back knee down. And as we rise up, we want to engage the glutes to take the hips forward. I like to do a low lunge versus a high lunge because then you get more of that quad stretching. And then from this position, adding a twist where we twist towards our front knee. This is going to get a little bit deeper into our psoas, the hip flexor. Shoulders draw down and back. And then our next pose is we're going to go into a cat-cow, just to transition lunge to the other side. Depending on your body, you can use downward facing dog first. So I'll show that option where we can come down, and if it's flexibility wise, trying to get that leg back to all fours, you can use down dog first, and then come knees down to the mat. From here, flowing cat cow a little bit, inhaling to arch our spines, and then exhale to round. We want to think about mobility through the back. We tend to have tight or stiff areas of the spine. We want to work on just trying to find mobility through the entire spinal column, starting at the tailbone, lifting to the crown of the head, and then exhale around. And let's flow one more time in each direction. First into our cow pose, relaxing shoulders down the back, and then into our cat pose. Often too with cat cow, I encourage to spend a little bit more time if one feels better than the other, taking a couple breaths there. And then we can lift back up And now we're going to step our left foot forward, dropping our right knee down as we lift into that low lunge. Again, tall posture to start, engaging the glute, and then we can rotate and twist. Opening up through the spine, through the hip. Again, this is another good one because not only we're stretching the hips, but we're strengthening the glutes, which is going to help realign the pelvis. With our tall neutral posture here, working on strengthening the back, as again we open up through the chest. And then we'll release back down and take ourselves into downward facing dog. From downward facing dog, maybe taking a moment to pedal the heels. And we'll step our right foot forward so we can move into triangle pose. Opening into warrior two, and once there, we'll straighten that front leg. Reaching fingertips all the way forward and tilting down. Nice straight arms. Fingertip to fingertip through the shoulders. I always encourage engagement of the glutes here, and one thing we have to remember is engaging a muscle through all the different planes of motion. So we just did glutes in our low lunge, now we're doing glutes in open hip position, so some external rotation. And we're going to release from here to come down to the mat into prayer twist lunge, where we can first lift our arms up to the sky. And as our hands come to heart center, first elongating forward and then rotating towards that front knee. Similar to our twisting lunge that we did a little bit ago, we want to think about hugging front knee in towards the chest, really extending that back leg, front knee over ankle, perhaps sinking the hips slightly lower. This is good for opening up the outside of the hip, which tends to get very tight on people. And then we'll return to downward facing dog. And we'll do the other side. I'm going to flip around just so that my back won't be to you and I can talk a little easier. And now we'll step our left foot forward, opening up again into warrior two stance, straightening leg, reaching all the way forward and tilting down into that triangle pose. We can gaze upward, outward, or downward. What's nice about this pose too is that we're not only working on lengthening the front leg, but we also have that opportunity to strengthen the core to help us be aligned using the glutes. Softness in the front knee gives a stretch through our adductors. And as we release hands back down to the mat, readjusting stance to lunge, inhaling arms up to the sky. And as we move into prayer twist lunge, hands to heart center, hinging forward, maybe a little bit deeper bend in the front knee. And as we rotate elbow to the far side of the knee. Always encouraging deep diaphragmatic breath, fully extending back leg. As we release our hands down, we can come to downward facing dog for just a second so that we can transition into our child's pose. Knees to mat, hips to heels, arms extend. We always have the option of fists underneath forehead, hands back by the heels. And I think child's pose is one of those that we can always make sure to include. It's good for range of motion in our hips. A little gentle rock side to side always feels good. It reminds me of that, you all probably have seen the meme where it says like, my yoga instructor said I could take child's pose anytime, and it's like a person in the grocery store. Must have been a stressful day. And now to work on stretching or strengthening our upper back, we're going to come forward and down onto our bellies for locust. As our shoulders go down the back, arms alongside the body. And we want our thumbs down, pinkies up. Inhaling to roll the shoulders back and lift away from the mat. We can stay here if we'd like, adding the legs lifting. So this is bringing us into spinal extension, hip extension. So working to correct all that forward flexion in the upper back, as well as the hip flexion. And we'll stay here for just one more breath. And then as we release down, we can take a counter pose with child's pose. And then our last one of the sequence is bridge. So we can come onto our backs with our feet hip distance apart. Shoulders draw down the back. We'll press into our heels to lift the hips to the sky. Thinking about hugging the knees inward, and this is the one for those that ask about like quad stretches is really great. Because again, not only are you strengthening your glutes and your hamstrings, but you're lengthening through the hip flexors, quads. We'll take just a few more breaths here. We always have the opportunity to walk up higher onto the shoulders, maybe adding chest expansion, working to strengthen the arms and the back. And then we can release. And that is the little sequence to correct those muscle imbalances we spoke of, the upper body and the lower body.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I have a question specifically that came in about the glutes and tight low back. So this is from Christine. She says, I have a yoga student who is quite active, who developed low back pain. The chiropractor said it's caused by tight glutes. What sequence would you recommend for a situation like this?
Yeah, for tight, if someone has tight glutes, so stretching things such as a pigeon pose, but what I like instead of prone pigeon, which everyone kind of goes to the prone pigeon, is doing a supine pigeon, or my favorite is a standing pigeon. Because again, what we talked about before about flexibility and mobility, and flexibility would be pigeon pose, prone pigeon, that your body weight, gravity pushing you down. Whereas standing pigeon, you're neutral with gravity and you have to use strength to move into that. And then prone pigeon, again, you have to actively move into it. So those would be two that I'd recommend. In terms of other glutes, prayer twist lunge, like we just did, that stretches out the outside of the hip. So with our glutes, we have 3 of them. And oftentimes people think the glute max, the one that extends, it's the other 2, the glute med and minimus on the outside part of the hip that get really tight. So
awesome, thank you.
My 2 like go-to best poses.
Yeah. Other questions, not necessarily pertaining to this specific imbalance, but sorry, I lost the question. We'll get to it at the end. There's lots of chats coming in, but we'll get to this question specifically. So you can continue.
Awesome, because I feel like I need you guys for longer. I need you more than just an hour. I have so much good stuff left. So good news is I put extra stuff in the PowerPoint. As an educator, as I said that I am with NC State, I'm always about like, how can I give my students as much as possible outside, like if they are interested. And I do the same thing with my YogaFit trainings. I'm like, I will give you like every single extra thing I can for you to take with you. So there probably will be some extra stuff that we might not get to. So let's get back into where we are. And this is talking about breath practices. So everyone thinks with yoga, physical, right? When I first started practicing yoga, I just thought I was like, hey, let's just stretch. And then we realized there's all these other things. And the one key thing that we know that goes right with the physical is the breath. So we say we do not move without breathing, we don't breathe without moving. So those go hand in hand. So if we can teach athletes to breathe better, that's going to help them so much. It creates that mind-body awareness and connection, allows them to improve their aerobic capacity. A big thing is it helps with the nervous system, and that some are energizing and some are calming, and we can use them in lots of different ways. So I want to go through my top 3 breath techniques. You may be familiar with these for athletes, and they are, first, let's teach them diaphragmatic breath. Let's just teach them to breathe deeply. And I would say of any of the sports, swimmers are the ones that are able to breathe diaphragmatically without consciously thinking of it, because that's what they have to do. Take a deep inhale, and then you have to long, slow exhale. Most other athletes are very shallow when they're doing their activity. And if we get them to become aware of how to breathe deeper, more consistently, it's going to give them more oxygen, which is going to help with performance, obviously. It's going to allow there to be energy, but then also stress reduction. And then from there, my next one to add on is the alternate nostril breath, Nadi Shodhana. One of my go-tos. I have to say there are countless pictures of me at races doing alternate nostril breath while everyone else is like being crazy, and I'm all calm and relaxed. And I have to say that is one technique. If we can learn how to harness our internal awareness and be calm and relax and improve that respiratory capacity before an event. There's so much benefit to that. And if you are unfamiliar with alternate nostril breath, I highly recommend quick, like YouTube, Google it. Very simple. It's a combination of a single nostril warming, single nostril cooling. So it's in one, out the other. It's back and forth. It's actually repetitive. So for athletes, it's like a moving meditation with breath. And so it's something that it's like they're actively doing something. And if an athlete's like me, they're kind of like, I can't just like sit and breathe quietly. I'm like, okay. It's like, where's my focus and awareness is not here. And when you're actively doing something with your hand and you're focusing, that is really good for athletes who are learning breath techniques. And then the other one is breath of joy. And that's probably what I feel is like the long forgotten one. And it's an energizing, uplifting breath. And also it's really good because you're swinging your arms, moving your arms around. And so there is this aspect, again, you're doing something, but it's also good to get range of motion through the shoulders and the hips because there's a little bit of squat. I'm going to sidestep from the breath and let us do our breath of joy is the last thing we do together because it'll be a great way for us to carry off into the rest of the day and segue into talking a little bit about stress. I'm like, who really wants to talk about stress? But exercise and stress together and where we can utilize some other aspects with our athletes. And yeah, so people like me, exercise is my stress relief, right? Stress management. And it's like mentally and emotionally relieving some stress, but not physically relieving stress. Exercise is actually stressful for our bodies. And there are athletes that, you know, exercise long duration. Like I have friends that like decide that's a great idea to ride from Raleigh to the beach. And it takes like 10 hours saddle time to do that. And it's like, that is a long time to be exercising. Think people who train for Ironman, or for me, what I do is I will have several, like 2 to 3 workouts a day. And I'll be like, okay, now I'm working on strength. Now I'm working on core. Now I'm working on flexibility. Now I'm working on cardio. And so athletes do that. It's not just like, hey, let's just exercise for an hour a day, 3 days, 4 days a week. It's like consistent every single day, working on all those different components, puts us in a stress state. So this is where you guys probably been looking at this screen and like, where is she going with all this stuff? And it's the HPA axis. And this is basically you can think of this sequence cascade of hormones when we are put in a stress state. And it starts with the hypothalamus, goes to the pituitary, and then goes to our adrenal glands, where then we have the cortisol released. Cortisol, we can think, we've heard of that before, and that's called the stress hormone, right? Cortisol is good because it gives us energy, but when it's imbalanced, it's not good for us. And so an athlete you can think of, if this is the stress sequence and they're exercising long duration several times a day, or even just like thinking the mental stress about like, did I perform how I was supposed to, or what workout do I have to do next? It's always putting us into that stress state. And we know that we have ideal cortisol, and that is lowest around 3 a.m. You're peacefully sleeping, slumbering away. And then it peaks around 8 a.m. or about 30 minutes after we wake up. And then it starts to trail off through the day. So that's how you feel like I'm energized in the morning. And as the day goes on, you're like, okay, I'm starting to slow down. When our body is chronically stressed from physical stress, emotional stress, mental stress, we release cortisol not on that pattern. So exercise, like with our athletes, but then all these other things. Inadequate sleep. I think of all my athlete friends who are like, oh, I have to get up at 4 a.m. and get my workout. And I was like, 4 a.m.? Like, I'm sleeping at 4. I don't know why you're up doing that craziness. So lots of different things contribute. And here is an idea of where we have normal cortisol curve in blue, and then we have abnormal cortisol curve in the orange. And I like to share this because then we can think, have I ever felt this before? And again, it's lowest at 3 a.m., peaks around 8 a.m., trails off through the day. And this is how our circadian rhythm, our bodies are designed to be. So someone may be like, hey, well, that's not quite me, but we can adapt to some extent to a different curve. That doesn't mean it's healthy and normal for our bodies. And so this is kind of the average. And I have listed the name of each of them, kind of describes what it is, and it shows. So in the upper left, we have a high early morning cortisol. That cortisol curve is shifted. So how you know you're on this curve is you wake up and it's like 3, 4, 5 a.m. and you're like, and your brain is like, and you're just like, I'm so tired, I just want to fall back asleep. You can actually just lay there for like hours and like not fall asleep because you have so much cortisol being released when you should be sleeping. And then what happens to those people, they tend to, in the afternoon, 3, 4, 5, like, oh, I'm just dragging, and then just like trying to get through the day. And then high cortisol curve throughout the day is it peaks and goes up. How you feel this is like the afternoon, you're like, I'm so exhausted. But yeah, I can't sit still. I have so much energy. And it's, I know I talk fast just because I get really excited, and I'm from New York originally. But those people, they're like, it's like, whoa, you just need to calm down. You've got something, way too much energy for like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then they're like, oh, I'm so tired. And then we have the high evening cortisol, which I jokingly refer to it as the college cortisol curve, because it reminds me a lot of my college students, and that it's low in the morning, peaks late in the day. So it's like 5, 6, 7, 8, and you're like, woohoo, I'm ready to go. And then they stay up late, and like 1, 2, 3 is like not uncommon. And it's like, no, you're kind of like backwards. And so when they wake up in the morning, then they're dragging, and they use like coffee and everything else just to get through the morning. And then in the afternoon, they start to think, I'm feeling like a human now. What happens when you follow any 3 of those curves? And I'd like to know, have you ever felt that before? Like, yeah, maybe I have, like probably once or twice, or any of them. Or maybe you're like, I feel it right now, like for sure. What happens if you follow any of those cortisol curves? Because what happens, cortisol is being released at the wrong time or wrong amounts throughout the day. And what happens is you can get to adrenal fatigue and adrenal exhaustion, which is cortisol not being released enough or at all. And you basically, this is what you feel like, I'm just like dead. And you can have like a great night's sleep. Like, I slept so great last night, like 8 hours solid. You wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, I'm just so tired. Why? Like, and then you sleep again, another great night. I'm still so tired. And so I'm sure you're now asking like, well, Renee, how do I fix this? Please tell me. And basically what you can do is any of these things: eat healthy, supplement with nutrition, stay hydrated, all that good health nutrition stuff. Time your workouts so that you're not, I again joke with my college kids, and there was one time I went to the office and it was like 9 o'clock. I swear I was like in my pajamas and had to like dress like a normal person so I could go to the office. And the gym was packed. I was like, what are y'all doing exercising? Like hardcore late at night. And yeah, so time your workouts, try to put them in places where it's not going to disrupt your curve. So if you're low energy in the morning, use some workouts to kind of get yourself so you're not relying so much on caffeine to get going in the morning. Work on sleep. But the biggest one yoga can do, practice relaxing. That is a huge thing with yoga. It puts us into our parasympathetic nervous system versus our sympathetic nervous system. We can do that with breath. We can do that with meditation, mindfulness, awareness, relaxing postures, and so many things we can do. What I have provided for you all, because again, we don't have enough time for everything, is example meditations. I have a 10-minute breath meditation, a 15-minute body scan, a 25-minute yoga nidra, and then for those athletes that are like, I can't sit still for a long period of time, ease them into meditation by having them do a moving meditation. And sun salutations is a nice way, again, kind of moving through a flow, gentle and easy a few times. And then that is a good lead into like, now that you've moved your body, now let's try 10 minutes of just relaxing the body. And so these are all ones that you're more than welcome to use yourself. They're ones that I recorded, so you're free to use them, share them, however, it gives you a good idea. And what I like is the time. They say that to be able to start to shift in your brain, you only need 2 minutes of deep breathing to start to change from that stress state to the less stress state. So if we can get them to at least have 2 minutes of breathing, that's great for them. And I want to take a moment to see if there's any questions that popped up, Lizzie.
Yeah, so speaking about the relaxation meditations you do, Jason Keeling, I believe, he asked, do you ever discuss the spiritual practices of yoga with your students, yamas, sutras, anything like that?
Yep. I definitely do that. I ease them in because some people like they see it as just the physical practice. So it's like, okay, let's create the mind-body connection first. And then we start talking about the yamas and the niyamas, the yoga sutras and all the other limbs. So generally approaching from limb 3 and 4, and then I backtrack to limb 1 and 2. And I always choose my 2 favorites, one yama and one niyama. And Contentment santosha is one that I like to do, especially with my athletes, because I say it's a state of being. It's not temporary. It's not like I'm happy, now I'm sad. And it's like, I help them from a standpoint for mental with their workouts. So I always, when I use those things, I tie it to them and say like, this is how it can help you. It's just a mind frame, it's an approach. And a parigraha, letting go. Those are the two, one yama and one niyama, I first approach with my athletes to get them to understand there's more to yoga than just the physical practice, and then graduate them in.
Awesome, thank you. Another one kind of in the realm. So Judy Litt asked, thoughts on yin yoga and its ability to strengthen connective tissue?
Yeah, that is, yes. With yin yoga, we know that yin is longer holds, and it is putting traction on your connective tissue. And with that is creating strengthening, just the same way you put force on muscle to strengthen it, same thing with the connective tissue. One thing I would caution with yin is the timing and approach with athletes or anyone who is doing especially vigorous, more intense workouts, not just like, hey, I'm just gonna go for a run or do something light, is because when you hold longer than that 2 to 3 minutes, it's going to temporarily weaken the muscle fibers for the next 24 hours. So I wouldn't want to do a yin practice tonight and then tomorrow morning be like, I'm gonna go do sprint intervals at the track, because then the chance of injury is greater. So I think it's a great thing to do in the off season. And when you're timing, like, so say it's the, say Saturday is a big workout day and then Sunday is the rest day, maybe do it Saturday or Sunday morning. So you have that time where you're not going to, again, create a chance for injury.
Gotcha. Yeah, and also, yeah, she asked the question about holding poses longer, if it's beneficial for athletes, and she just commented back. She said, "Just got my answer, so thank you." So we answered 2 in 1. So,
and I'm going to actually, I love that that question came up, and there was one thing I actually talked to a friend last night. I'm like, I really want to fit this in, but I don't really think there's time, so I'll put it last. And so for people who want the benefits of longer holds without creating that chance of injury, Pnf stretching, are we familiar? Proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. It's an advanced stretching technique. So I included a slide here talking about muscle proprioceptors, how to do Pnf stretching. And then I really, like I said, I didn't think I was going to there. So I have a video for y'all on how to do those advanced stretching techniques. And for not just hamstrings, because hamstrings is the one that people always use. And we just discussed before that hamstrings isn't really the target for muscle imbalances in the upper and lower body. So glutes, upper back, I have all sorts of different ways to stretch in there. And so that was my little extra thing to include for you all.
Yeah, and on that additional, you have a training, YogaFit has a training. So I'm going to put this in the chat. Definitely everyone check it out. It's 15% off the 100-hour athletes program. And definitely check that out. Other questions? Let's see, there was a question about the breathing. And this is funny, I was actually a swimmer in college. And I kind of definitely resonated with this one, but it was talking about, oh God, you guys are just so wonderful. It gets lost in it. Oh, so here it is. Do you teach alternate nostril with or without a retention pre-event? Does that make sense?
Yes, so alternate nostril breath, you can either do it where you're breathing. Any of our breath techniques, you can add breath retention, or it's like a pause or space in the breath. And I always leave it to comfort. And some people like, it's kind of like, I feel like for me, when I'm trying to be calm and relaxed and like settle down, depending on where it is, like I might do it later in the day, and then I add the retention, that pause. But for me, example of my duathlon events, I don't add any there because I want to make sure I'm breathing consistently back and forth and get more of that meditative. And that pause or space can be as short as just, a second or two or longer. It really depends on the person. So you can teach it or practice it either of those ways.
Awesome. Let's see what else is going on. Everyone, by the way, everyone has been loving this and they found it so helpful. And someone asked if you'd be willing to share your email for questions. And You can say it and I can type it, or if you prefer to type it in the chat real quick.
I can say it because it's really easy. It's Renee Harrington. So my name's on the screen, just like that. Renee Harrington at Hotmail. And make sure it's Hotmail because there's a person like in Texas that has Gmail. It's not Gmail, it's Hotmail. Renee Harrington at Hotmail. And yeah, time with any questions.
Awesome. We have a few more minutes, so let's try to get one or two more. So this is a question specifically about IT. So, and any suggestions for dealing with a tight IT band?
Yes. IT, iliotibial band. Ilio for ilium, your pelvis. Tibia, tibial, tibia, so technically this is a ligament. It's connecting your hip to your lower leg. And it is not something that you can stretch. It's not a muscle. It's connective tissue. And you have two muscles that go right into your IT band, your glute max. And how many people have tight glutes? Only because we use them, but also that anterior pelvic tilt. And then you have your TFL, tensor fasciae lata, which is a hip flexor muscle. And so you think of like, if you like jeans, like, back in the day when we all didn't just wear sweats every day, you have that like extra pocket, that small little like coin pocket, fifth pocket. You think of it like right there. That's where that muscle runs. It's very short. Those two get tight, glutes tight, TFL tight, those pull on it. So work on stretching those two muscles will start to relieve the IT band tightness and also realign your pelvis into that neutral versus anterior tilt.
Awesome. Thanks, Jane, for that question. So this was another question from, excuse me if I mispronounce your name, Diestine. So she asked a question in the chat and she just asked it again. She said, would you traditionally warm up before the sequence that you did, or is this okay on its own? So the first sequence that you did, would you do a warm up before and then move into that, or?
So that multi-directional flow sequence is a warm up in itself. So you can use that flowing to create the warm up. If someone needs additional warm up from that, like you're more than welcome to do any sort of like cat-cow flow, some downward facing dog, any sort of little like chair flow, forward fold. But since it is a flowing and we're not holding it, it creates a repetitive warm up sequence in itself. I like to add it to the center of a sun salutation. So getting some of that chair in the forward fold, I just put that in the middle with the vinyasa sequence and then come back up.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to kind of stop there for the questions and tell everyone that, again, feel free to email Renee. We will be posting this webinar and the PowerPoint on our blog and sending post-webinar emails to you. So you'll get all that information. Again, definitely check out the YogaFit's 100-hour athletes program. You get 15% off with athlete 15, so ATHLETE 15. Thank you, Renee, so much. This was so helpful. I learned a lot, and we definitely want to have you back.